The H1B Guy here, and this morning the H1B Guy presents live Marc Pavlopoulos, CEO, Path to Canada. And I'm just really excited to have Marc on today. But I would like to ask you, if you haven't already, to please subscribe to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube and like this video so that I can continue to produce more content like this for you. I also wanted to mention the H1B Guy offers a variety of consulting services. I help businesses and individuals solve complex work authorization issues in the recruitment process while bringing awareness to employment-based immigration benefits. If I can help you, please reach out. Well, I'm very proud to announce that today's post is brought to you by Path to Canada, the ideal plan B for high-skilled immigrants currently in the U.S. whose status may be uncertain. If you're facing an H-1B denial or OPT expiration, don't get caught off guard. Make sure you have a plan B. Path to Canada is the ideal solution. And also by RecruiterNetworks.com, the smart solution for digital perm ads since 2001. Well, as I said earlier, I'm just beyond thrilled to introduce to you Marc, the owner and CEO of Path to Canada. As I've said, the Path to Canada sponsorship, recently started here in terms of really out of necessity. And, the interesting thing as I get into this is why Path to Canada. And, you may be wondering, why is the H1B Guy partnering with a company called Path to Canada? And that answer is very simple. The U.S. continues to be the #1 destination country in the world, but Canada has continued to close the gap. And specifically for those individuals who are looking to immigrate for work, there was a recent report out there that listed Canada as the #1 destination country for those looking to immigrate for work. I'm also aware of the fact that many of you who follow the H1B Guy are considering what other options you have outside of the US. As reported in the data that I covered earlier this week, where 1,042 high-skilled US-based immigrants were surveyed, the analysis uncovered that 70% of high-skilled immigrants in the US are currently looking at more visa-friendly countries. While I will continue to advocate for immigration reform, and for any of you who've watched this channel for any amount of time know I don't want the US to lose the war on human capital, I also realize that a large percentage of you need to have a plan B. Whether that is due to a failed H-1B lottery petition, as a lot of you have reached out to me over the last week asking, hey, what are my options because you weren't picked up? An H-1B denial possibly you could be facing, or your OPT could be expiring. And again, you weren't picked up in the lottery and you're not sure what your options are. Or there's a lot of you out there who may be fed up with our broken legal immigration system for high-skilled workers, and you want to see what else is out there. So that's where this partnership with Path to Canada makes sense. So I've done enough talking. Marc, I'm gonna bring you up here. How you doing this morning?
Great, Robert. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Really glad to have you on here today. I wanted to just jump right into, the first question, Marc, and that's this. How did you become the owner and CEO of a company called Path to Canada?
Yeah, it's been kind of an interesting road. So just a quick background. I'm an American. I grew up in California. I've been in Silicon Valley since .com time, almost 20 years of working for VC-backed tech companies, always in sales and biz dev and partnership roles. But I also, during that time, I lived in Canada twice. So I was up there for my MBA, went to grad school there, came right back to Silicon Valley for startup, had no plans to stay. So I was on a student visa, came back, and then unexpectedly ended up going back to Toronto a year later, working venture capital, worked for another tech company, came back home to Bay Area, so 5 years total in Canada, but it planted a seed in the back of my mind of, the differences tech scene Canada, tech scene US. And it was probably a few years after that my first company I launched is Syndesis, which is I build engineering teams in Canada for venture capital backed startups in the US. And what I learned, I've had that business since 2014. But what I learned from that business along the way was we're also a remote employer in Canada. So all these teams we're building, the US companies are like, Mark, we're not going to incorporate in Canada. So I have a PEO, it's a professional employer organization, which means I have a Canadian corporation that employs Canadian workers. A few years back, one of my clients in New York, they approached me and they said, Mark, you've got the engineering team. We have our team in New York and we have a team in Canada. We have someone who can't stay in the US. Can you help us with Canadian immigration? And I said, sure, of course I would help a client. And that's when I called a Canadian immigration lawyer I'd spoken with. And I asked, I'm like, well, how does this work? This person's technical. I remember when I got a Canadian work permit, you had to advertise the job. It took some time for me to get that work permit. And this Canadian immigration lawyer is like, yeah, Mark, that's all gone now. We have a new program called Global Talent Stream. We know we're short over 200,000 engineers. It's a fast track, 30 days, start to finish, for a qualified engineer to come into Canada. I'm like, oh, well, then let's try that program. So got one person in.
What was that time? What year was that, Mark?
I think that the program started in 2017. So maybe we're coming up on 4 years now.
Okay.
So first I got a couple people in, and then every 6 months, someone in my network would approach me, say, would bring up we have an H1B that can't stay in the US. And I'm like, oh, we could just, I can sponsor them, through my company in Canada and move them up to Canada. And then they can work for you remotely from Vancouver or Toronto or anywhere. So I started doing, a few of those, and Canadian Immigration gave me some spots where I could do this in volume. And then it occurred to me wait, I can help, half dozen people whose company is open to moving them up. But then I realized, wait, bigger picture. I mean, as you know, Robert, the H1B program very well. There are thousands of people every year who can't stay in the US. They go back to home country. They're going back to India, Ukraine, China. And I thought, wait, Mark, think bigger. You can help a large volume of people whose company maybe can't move them to Canada, but they just need to go or want to go. And that's when I launched Path to Canada about a year ago. I went live a few weeks before the pandemic hit. But that's what gave me the inspiration it was basically saying, I've got a process that works to move people up, but the bigger picture is, let me connect hundreds and thousands of tech workers who want to or have to leave the US with Canadian tech companies that will use the work visa. The Canadian tech companies will be their sponsor. That's where the idea came from.
Yeah, and you go back to that data, the article that I covered, it was a working paper actually that was produced at University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. And that working paper talks about what you're referring to, which is really kind of a pipeline. And that pipeline is that there are folks here in the US that are voluntarily looking to leave. So you're really talking about two different candidate pools, if we're being honest, right? Because you're talking about one, denials, being an H1B individual here on an H1B that maybe either has their H1B denied or revoked by their employer, and has 60 days to consider, other options. Or you've got folks that are been here in the US that say, I'm fed up with the system. I'm going to look at what my other options are. That's the data from UTC that 70% of over 1,000 folks reported that they are considering voluntarily other options. And then you have the US educated, right, that come here, get an OPT, work for 12 or 36 months. Maybe they even have failed lottery attempts. And so it sounds like, to me, when I look at what you just described and how Path to Canada is set up, it ultimately is a pipeline, correct, for individuals maybe here in the US looking to take their skills to Canada. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a good way. When I was trying to find the right terminology when I set the company up, I was like, oh, is this like a marketplace? Like I'm connecting. So on one hand, we have like an intake form where people fill out their years of experience in the US, years of experience from home country, the degrees, maybe, we ask a few questions around like, have you taken the IELTS test yet? Have you tried to get Canadian permanent residence? We try and gauge people's interests, but also their tech experience level. Mm-hmm. But then, then we video interview everyone who goes into the database. It's not just an anonymous database. My recruiting team is reaching out to people saying, hey, let's have a conversation on video. Let's talk to us, find out, answer questions about Canada, let you know about the job market up there, but it's a curated database list. Mm-hmm. Then I'm going to the Canadian tech companies who are looking to hire talent because the war on talent is just as severe in Canada as in the US. And as I present to them, I said, here's a database of people that you've never seen who are motivated to move to Canada, US educated, US experienced. As you said, Robert, either they can't stay, they have their expiration date of when they have to leave the US, or maybe they're here longer term. Their immigration lawyer says you're on a 30-year wait for a green card. And sometimes, unfortunately, as you said, that's the downside of US immigration. And then the sadness kicks in. The person says, well, wait a minute, I have an awesome job here, but what is my future long term?
Right.
Versus they can look at a Canada option and be like, work permit's 2 years. In those 2 years, you'll be a Canadian permanent resident. Canada is very fast moving when it comes to their immigration programs. Those are the skills people are having.
So that's interesting that you say that. And I think a lot of folks that are probably watching this right now, when you said 30-year wait, they chuckled because a lot of the numbers are 150 years out there for certain categories, right? And I think that just exacerbates the issue even more. And it kind of brings me back to what you talked about in terms of vetting, right? And so I think that a lot of the people that watch this channel and keep up with me are in the STEM field primarily, high skilled tech immigrants. I'd say 70% probably have immigrated here from India in terms of my channel demographics. And so what I want to do is kind of go over the ideal candidate, right? And it isn't just about where they're from for you, but it's more of being in the US with US tech skills, right? So can you give me an idea of like what kind of degrees are you interested in? How many years of experience are we talking about? And are we talking about just US experience? Are we talking about maybe some other international experience as well? Can you give me an idea as a recruiter about what is the ideal candidate that you're looking for Path to Canada?
Yeah, I can definitely give you the overview of what the ideal candidate looks like. So I've also have feedback now from dozens of Canadian tech companies that I've spoken with, and they're very clear on the roles they're looking for. So first off, education-wise, you have to have a computer science degree, engineering degree. There has to be at least a bachelor degree there. It doesn't have to necessarily be from the US. It could be like you say someone from India with an IIT degree, and then they came over to the US. One thing everyone asks is they want a minimum of 5 years experience. So if that's what we're hearing consistently from the Canadian employers, 5+ years. And that could be 2, 3, 4 years, in China, Ukraine, India, then you come to the US, then you work for a few more years. But what they're specifically looking for is people who are in the US now, who have some degree of US experience, 5 years plus, and the degree. And then the tech experience it's a variety. It's all over the place. Ruby, PHP, data scientists. We hear all the different, platforms and technologies. It is definitely an array, but those are the basics of what we hear from Canadian tech companies of what they're looking for.
So 5 years of combined experience, U.S. educated, it sounds like, but some of that combined experience needs to be in the U.S. But then I think from an international standpoint, if the degree's not here in the U.S., if they have 5 or more years of U.S. experience, then that would be sufficient as well. And it sounds like STEM, so heavy in the programming, engineering, probably as you said, research, analytics, so mathematics, statistics. Sounds like kind of our umbrella of STEM. So I wanted to bring it up here. There was a question that came in from Garima, who is always in the live streams, Mark, and she's a huge supporter of this channel, and she had a good question. She asked about healthcare professionals that have licenses in the U.S. not being recognized in Canada. I'm not as familiar with that question in terms of what the U.S. recognizes versus Canada, and you may not be either. But I just wanted to ask: what do you know about that like any healthcare individuals? Because there's a good percentage of folks that do watch the channel and read the website that are in the medical space. So doctors, RNs, PTs. Any idea on that, Mark?
Yeah, I wish I had more info on that because I have heard frustration, to Gurman's point about people saying, I'm trying to move to Canada, but they have a whole different set of criteria. So
Hmm.
because I've worked for tech companies and startups and that have been very, focused on engineers, that is the only place where I focus. It's basically
Okay.
people who code, write code, product managers. Yeah,
Hmm.
basically a technical degree in that way. I haven't gone into the healthcare realm. I know it's much more complicated. So that is not a place we can help. I have heard people approaching saying, Mark, I'm working for a biotech company in the US or healthcare company, but I'm an software engineer. I'm writing code. I'm helping build their platform. I'm like, that's fine. That experience
Right.
is good. But I do realize there is some frustration on that side in healthcare and other professions. Sometimes the degrees don't match. For
Yeah.
tech, it is no problem.
That's interesting, and I think I'm sure that they're probably we could probably do some due diligence, and there probably is an organization that does healthcare pipelining to Canada. I would imagine out there. I haven't looked into it, but as I've said, the medical space for H1B for me is something that I've recently in the last year become very knowledgeable in. Before that, it was all my experience was tech as well. We had another question come in from Vineet. Mark, it says, I can see the candidate assessment form ask explicitly for U.S. tech degree only. How will it help for non-U.S. tech degree folks who are having U.S. work experience? So I think what they're saying is that they have tech experience in the U.S., but they don't have a U.S. tech degree. Do you still want individuals like that to fill out the assessment?
Yes. So I know there's West. I believe there's if that's the acronym, right? Of validating tech degrees. So I know the conversations I'm having with my recruiting team that's vetting everyone coming in. I'll keep going to the example of IIT, but there are grads from schools, India, and basically, I mean, obviously top-notch schools. That's on our side. We're not seeing that as a problem. And I'm working with someone right now who went to engineering school in Ukraine. They're going into Canada. Immigration lawyer did not see that as a problem because there's significant U.S. tech experience.
Okay. And Vineet, there's a link in the description to the video. I think you've probably already been on the website. I shared it on Twitter too. And if you have any issues, you can Mark's contact information is on the website, so you can definitely connect with him, or he can get you connected with their recruiting director. There was one other question, Mark, and then we'll keep going with the Q&A. I just wanted to go ahead and while they come in, just hit them live because I think they're relevant. And this is from Prakul, and it says, I applied for PR a couple of years back with IELTS 8, but still didn't make the cutoff. Through Mark, are we talking about work visa or PR?
Oh, that's a great question. So we're talking about work visa. So what happens in Canada is, and I want to be clear, I'm not a Canadian immigration lawyer. I've worked with lots of files. We always defer to a Canadian immigration lawyer for a very, very specific question. But the way Global Talent Stream is set up, let's call it Canada's H1B. The qualifications are you have a tech degree, you are currently, in a technical role, you code, you have a job offer from a Canadian company, the IELTS test is part of the application. So in that application, that process for Global Talent Stream, it from start to finish pre-COVID was 30 days. And what you can do is you can have a consultation with a Canadian immigration lawyer. I mean, we're taking that on at Path to Canada to make sure you qualify for the program. But once you do, you basically have an attitude of Canadian immigration officials of, and this is very different from us here in the US, they're trying to get people in. The goal of the program is 200,000 plus tech workers, STEM backgrounds into Canada. They're in the 40 to 50,000 range. They are far short of the numbers they're trying to get. So you have people trying to work with you, unlike in the US. And PR is very different. PR is very points focused. So what happens is, this is the path that we end up telling people. Say you put your background in, you fill out the form on the Path to Canada website, you're in the database, you get interviewed, you get interviewed by us, you get put into the pool. 1, 2, 3 months later, a Canadian tech company wants to speak with you. We always ask your permission. We never shop you in front of companies. Every candidate in the pool gets an inquiry saying, hey, here's a gaming company, here's an artificial intelligence company, or here's a B2B company. Or, do you want to be interviewed? Once the worker says yes and goes through the company's interview process, if the company wants to hire them and takes them through Global Talent Stream, they get into Canada, they start their job. The fact that they are in Canada with a valid job offer gives them 50 points towards PR. Then they get even more points because they're in Canada working. So what we encourage people to do is Global Talent Stream is a 2-year work visa. Get into Canada, you're working, then apply for PR. From what our understanding is, it is almost automatic that in a 1 to 2 year period, before your work visa expires, you will have Canadian PR, because the two big factors are 50 extra points. You've got a job offer and you're in Canada working.
Living and working in Canada in a tech job, right? Yeah, and points here, and this is a huge thing I talk about on this channel, Mark, is a merit-based points immigration system. And that's what you have in Canada for PR for high-skilled immigrants, right? I mean, there's a point system to it. And you know, the express entry aspect, I think, is another one that comes in. But this is specifically referencing Global Talent Stream's path into Canada is what Mark does here. So I just want to take a moment and ask all of you out there, if you're currently watching, if you haven't already, like this video, subscribe to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube. Mark and I will continue to take your questions around Path to Canada, around the process. As you can tell, Mark is very knowledgeable about the recruitment pipelines and getting into Canada. You know, Mark, we were on a call last night, and we'll talk about that a little later. But you know, the ad says Canada is a plan B because we're talking about U.S. based workers. But really, I mean, it's a lot of, you alluded to immigration attorneys in Canada earlier. A lot of the immigration attorneys you talk about say Canada is a plan A right now. And there's a lot of articles and data out there showing that. So Mark, what I wanted to move on to here is around something that you address on your website. And I think it's very important for us to talk about here, which, and you've talked about it a little bit in terms of the process, but the two parallels, right? So there is the initial upfront, hey, I'm interested in being considered for roles, the vetting process, and how you go about that, right? And then there is the other side of it, which is getting into Canada, right? And the window of time that takes. And I know, you know, COVID probably exponentially extended that time. I believe that you and I talked about some of those times have come down a little bit. So let's talk about somebody that maybe is in a position where they have 60 days remaining, right? That's a pretty tight window in anything, right? But why 60 days? Well, 60 days is my H1B has been revoked, or my OPT is expiring June 15th, right? Whatever that may be. So let's talk about the two parallels in terms of working through Path to Canada, identify an employment-based opportunity, and then what happens after that.
Yeah, and I'm going to separate the 60 days. I know there are people obviously that on this call are listening. They're going to be in a similar type situation. We have inquiries right now where we're working with people who have middle or end of May and then June dates where they have to leave the US, and they were waiting to hear good last week and they didn't. It was the last try. So I want to differentiate them for a second. So if you were on that tight of a time frame, the ideal solution is, the first company I have, Syndesis, as a remote employer in Canada, the ideal solution is, could your current employer, are they open to having you work remotely from Vancouver, Toronto, any city that geographically lines up with where the office is now? On a short time frame, if your company is open to that, that is the best scenario. I'm doing that right now with two people, one from Ukraine, one from India. They have dates when they have to leave the US that are very close. So how things are with Canadian immigration, it's gotten better now. During the worst of COVID, the 30-day process for a global talent stream from date of application until the day you can go into Canada, it went from 30 days to 90. It is back now to 30 or 40 days from application date until approval. So basically the way that works is, you know, it may take a couple weeks to put an application together. Then, you know, if you're just moving your job to Canada, that is the faster way. Then a couple weeks, put your application together, you apply, 30 to 40 days, you get the acceptance letter from Canadian immigration. Then they require the border in Canada stay open for work permits. my understanding is that there's three different groups of people coming in. If you're a student on a student visa, and this changes every week, but they have consistently stayed open. If you have an approved work permit from Global Talent Stream, you are allowed in. If you're a permanent resident, you have an approved application. A lot of them are being put on hold. So, but the work visas are allowed in. You basically have a negative COVID test. You take 72 hours before you go in. You go into Canada, you quarantine 14 days. That 14-day quarantine plan is part of your Global Talent Stream application. It's included in there. But basically go into Canada, you're quarantined for 14 days. You got your laptop with you. You start working that first day of quarantine. So it's a quick transition from leaving the US to your quarantine, you're staying in your Airbnb, and then finding your place. So that's the fastest way to go. Yes, in theory, with Path to Canada, we could match you up with a company really quick. We do ask on the form, like if there's a date when you have to leave the US, do we prioritize those people? But we can't guarantee that the moment you come in with a 60-day window that we have an exact Canadian company to interview with.
Hopefully, so on the company or the company intercompany transfer, right? If from GTS, I just wanted to hit on that really quickly. That is Syndesis is another one of Marc's companies. It is separate from Path to Canada, but what it does do, and I just want to bring this up because I don't want folks blowing me up or blowing you up about it. Do not reach out to me or Marc on that unless you know for sure that your employer is willing to put forward some significant capital to make that happen on your behalf. And I don't mean to say that it's all about the money, but that process is very expensive. It's not a cheap process. Believe me, as a former employer, we've considered that multiple times. It's a very expensive process, but the but is that there are employers out there that are willing to do it and have the capital to do it and see a lot of value in it over the long term. So if that's your employer, then that would be kind of an ideal situation for Marc and Syndesis. Outside of that, if you have more time or you do want to see what other options are out there or you're planning ahead, that's where the Path to Canada comes in. Because that's going to be, we're going to find a new employer in Canada for you all together. Yeah. So completely different. There was a question that came in from Prakul who asked the earlier question. And he wanted to know, are the services provided charged, Marc? So for Path to Canada specifically is what we're talking about here with this question.
Oh, no charge, zero. When I set this company up, and this goes for either model, if I'm moving your job to Canada or if we're helping you with Path to Canada connect to a Canadian employer, there's never a charge for the worker. I've heard of some companies that charge. I just think that's wrong. The company, just so you understand where the revenue is coming from, the company pays for the worker. So the company will pay us a fee when a worker is sitting in Canada in a seat on their first day.
Placement fee.
Yeah, placement fees. I make this completely free. I've had enough conversations with people who've shared with me that people try to charge them to get a job. I think that's unfair and unethical. There is never a charge.
Yeah. And you do all of that through, very tight profile and vetting process, resume working, video, resumes going out to clients and customers. So when you get to a point that there is an interview, it's serious. This isn't window shopping, generally that's happening. And I wouldn't be involved with Marc if that were the case, because ultimately this is about, this platform, making sure that you are all aware of what options you have. And that's why I just love what Path to Canada does and really what Marc does. And I wanted to move into, you hit on this earlier, Marc, and that was, Canada's been experiencing this massive technology job growth, and it's been reported that they've recently missed their immigration targets. Some of that has to do with COVID, but some of it just has to do with a lot of U.S. major enterprises relocating north of the border. And as I alluded to earlier, it was recently named the #1 destination for those looking to relocate for work. What kind of trends are you seeing right now? And if you could forecast maybe the next few years in Canadian immigration for high-skilled immigrants?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point you brought up, because from when I lived in Canada, maybe 15 years back, 12 years back, and I was in venture capital, if I look at the Canadian, I'm gonna focus for a moment on venture capital backed companies that are growing. When I look at the size of what was happening back then versus now, dramatically different. So the Canadian tech scene has exploded over the last 5 to 7 years. What you have now is you have U.S. VCs now actively funding Canadian companies, putting in much more money than the Canadian tech community, Canadian venture capital community puts in. So you have growing Canadian tech companies. That's one. Then the second one is every major US tech company has a hub in Canada. So Canada's top engineering school is University of Waterloo. A couple miles away is the Google campus, basically to siphon off the best of the best. Microsoft's been there for years. Amazon has multiple offices across Canada. Facebook has an office in Canada. So every big US tech company has an office in Canada. What the big US ones have done is they figured out Canadian immigration years back. The H1Bs that can't stay, a lot of them, they'll just move to the Canadian office, but then they'll recruit out of the Canadian office. The next wave we see is there's US companies, I'll use Coursera as an example. That's the online education tech company, online education company. They opened an office in Toronto a couple of years back. These are companies that are anywhere from like 500 to 2,500 people in the US. What they're doing is they're opening a branch in Canada because they're going after Canadian engineers. But what they're also doing is then they're moving their H1Bs up there, and then they're using Global Talent Stream to hire the best of the best because they kind of paralleled it. They look at their US recruiting efforts with H1B and then look at Canada and what they could do in Canada. And they basically say, we figured out Global Talent Stream. It's easier, it's faster, it's lower cost, it's more open. Let's build our engineering teams north of the border. So I think that trend accelerates. I don't think most US companies, if you went to a US HR person in Silicon Valley, Boston, New York, at a tech company and said, are you aware of Global Talent Stream? Do you realize that if you had an office in Canada, you could be hiring engineers in 30 days, and it's fast, it's extremely low cost? The majority of the American HR people would say, I've never heard of this, I have no concept of this. Hey, that's interesting. I think as the word gets out more, there will be more and more US companies taking advantage, saying engineering office number 2 is north of the border.
Yeah, and you see that trend starting to happen now, right? It started well before now, but I think as we come out of this post-COVID era and what return to office is going to look like, or just having an organization of development teams, in certain pockets of Canada, I think is you're going to see that. You're going to see more of that. I mean, there's a lot of tech startups that, going back to end of the summer, early fall last year, that we're talking about relocating, north of the border, not only because of the reduction in cost, but just overall the quality. And I think that's where you start to see the narrowing that's really happened, is that there's a reduction in cost and an increase in quality. And those costs generally are corporate based costs, right? Not employee costs that I'm referring to. And, you and I, as I mentioned earlier, we were on a clubhouse with our good friend Roman Zelichenko, who actually introduced and connected you and I, and we were talking about the lottery numbers and Canada as a plan B, and I think what came out of that, and I went and did a little more digging last night. Because I haven't seen anything official yet, but lottery numbers as a whole, yesterday they were talking about roughly a 20% selection rate. And if that's the case, the numbers that would have to have been submitted electronically would be over 300,000. Now, I'm not factoring in, the H1B numbers into that. But when I did my predictions at the end of the year for 2020 going into 2021, it really felt like the numbers for the lottery were going to be pretty low, like in the upper 100,000, low 200,000s. But last year was 275. If this year's 300, there's a lot of folks that are going to be looking for opportunities. And so I think that, that's kind of what has led you and I to get connected. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to just kind of talk about this partnership with the H1B Guy platform and why that makes sense for Path to Canada.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to our conversations early on, Robert, when you were describing the company you built and your focus, you're like, hey, I want to help people. I have knowledge on the H1B program and I want to help. And what I've also learned from the dozens of conversations I've had with people who've gone to different webinars we've held is the US system, the way it is now, it's just not favorable. It is, as you mentioned earlier, it's flawed. Mm-hmm. And when I know that thousands and thousands of people leave the US unhappily every year, my first thought is like, it's simply not fair. But I also looked at how convoluted US politics are, and I can't see a solution that I hope happens here. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why I like the idea of a partnership is you're trying to help people stay in the US, but we know the reality is a lot of people can't. Canada is the best plan B. But as you also mentioned, Robert, there's people who they're on an H1B or they're working in the US. They've been here 5, 10 years. But then there's a feeling of uncertainty when, as you mentioned, it's not just 30 years, the wait for a green card's longer. And that's not a way to live when you think, hey, I did everything right. I came to the US. I worked my ass off. I went to a great school. I continued to work hard. It's like I made it. And then US immigration says, not quite. You can stay on your work visa status almost indefinitely. It's simply not fair. And so one perspective I'm bringing is, I'm an American. I grew up in California. I've been in Silicon Valley since the late 90s. Just moved from Silicon Valley to New York. But it's the perspective of an American who went to Canada twice. I did my student visa up there. Lived there 2 years, came back. And then a year later, I ended up living there 3 years on multiple work visas and came back. So when I speak of living in Canada or quality of life, it's personal. I've been there. I've lived it. And I'm the son of an immigrant. My father couldn't even get into the US. It was in the 60s. He tried to move here from Germany. Ironically, Canada welcomed him for his post-PhD work, but the US didn't. It took him a couple of years in Canada to finally get to the US. So I always grew up knowing Canada is welcoming to immigrants, from my own family experience. So I know that I have something unique that can help people that tune into you.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think, one of the themes on this channel has been, the worst way to come to America is based on your merit and skill. And that's not the case for Canada. They're very opening to individuals with high merit and skill. And you also hit on something else, having, moved around a good bit, right? Lived in California, New York, Canada. You've experienced both coast and north of the border. I think it gives you an interesting perspective on business as a whole, on what companies are looking for, and honestly, what different parts of the world are like. The other thing too that I think is interesting about what you said, and it's very true, and that is, I do really want to help people, and I understand at the end of the day, most folks choose the US as their number one destination, but we've got some tarnish that we've got to clean up here, and that even predates the President Trump administration. We talk about there hasn't been comprehensive immigration reform in this country since 2005. And a lot of what we use for our high skilled employment based laws are based on something that was written in 1990. So now's the time where we will lose the war on human capital, because you're seeing it become a digital borderless war. That's why Canada becomes a super viable option for employers who say, I need to keep this employee. What can I do? Syndesis can help you with that. Or you're an individual that says, I want to know what else is out there for me in a more visa-friendly country. Path to Canada can help you with that. And so it just makes a lot of sense to do so. I did joke last night, though, Mark, and I'll say it one more time here again. When I look at it, the only thing that Canada really loses on for high skilled immigrants around the world is the weather. And that's just from someone who grew up in the South and has lived in the South my entire life. I've got the jacket on today because it's like 40 degrees. It's a pretty cool spring morning here for April 1st in Metro Atlanta. And so I walked outside before I came back in, and it was a little cool in the house. We didn't turn the heat on this morning, so we're just trying to get through with it. But I wanted to just see if there's any other questions for Marc about Path to Canada, about the process. We've got a couple more minutes here, but I wanted to also talk about Marc. We didn't get into this, but I'm sure that when you have an employer that's looking to bring someone into Canada, are you using the employer's immigration attorney? Do you have contacts, the Canadian immigration attorneys, that help you with that process? What is that? We didn't really cover that in terms of the legal side of it. How does that work?
Yes. So with Syndesis, then I'm using my company. I am the sponsor of the worker coming from the US. So I have a great immigration lawyer who's an expert on global talent stream.
Okay.
I work with, when it comes to Path to Canada, what I tell the Canadian companies is I give them a choice. So on our call, I say, do you have an immigration lawyer on retainer? We'll use them. If you don't, I've got a great pool of Canadian immigration lawyers that I have experience with.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that makes it easier is most of the Canadian tech companies we work with who say, yes, we're going to sign up. We want to have access to your pool of candidates. What they'll mostly say is, and I asked this on the very first call, they'll say, we have experienced global talent stream, Marc. We've been sourcing the best of talent globally. Just brought someone from France, just brought someone from Ukraine, just brought someone from China. We'd love to work with you. We have experience. You're giving us access to a pool of people from the US that we don't have access to. So yeah, and I always tell the Canadian tech companies, I can't work with you unless you have an immigration lawyer on talent. There has to be that person out of respect for, the worker coming across the border. Everything has to, I want the professionalism of an immigration lawyer involved.
If you don't have one, we're going to have to use mine, right? I think that's what that comes down to. Oh, that's good to know. I was curious about that. That was one thing we hadn't covered. Rakshitha asks a question, Marc. What are your views on people who are still waiting to hear about COPR due to COVID?
Don't know that acronym, COPR.
I'm wondering if it was maybe CAPR, Canadian Permanent Residency. I'm not sure. I'm not.
And that might allude to my comment earlier. So my understanding is Canada, and you said it also, Robert, their immigration numbers, a couple months back, they upped the number. It used to be,
it was like 400,000, I think I saw.
400,000 is the goal. Then it goes up to 405 and 410. It's over 1% of their population they want coming in every year.
Wow.
The problem is, like, when COVID hit, all the Canadian immigration officials had to go home. And that's why they used to process the work visas, and for global talent stream 30 days, it extended out to 90, 100 days. They got processed. Now things are getting back to normal. What I don't know is when, my understanding is permanent resident applications, there's long delays, especially if you're not coming from the US. If you're outside of the US, I'm hearing about extreme delays, but they're trying to speed that up. So the best,
she said it's confirmation of PR is what she meant by the CO, confirmation of PR.
Yeah, I think that's due to the Canadian immigration officials having to go home due to COVID.
Yeah.
So, and there's also separation between permanent residence versus work visas. I can only speak to work visas, and I'm consistent here. Immigration lawyers, we're coming back to that 30-day window. Someone from the US, we can hit some rapid deadlines. Outside of the US, longer, unfortunately. So
if I'm a high-skilled immigrant here in the US and I get an offer from a Canadian-based company through Path to Canada, all things considered, probably looking at 2 to 3 months before I'm in the country and working. It kind of post offer acceptance, everything is filed and moving. Is that accurate, or are we looking at a longer time frame?
Yeah, let's break down the time frame for a moment. So interview processes can go, say we reach out to you, you're in the database pool, and you get contacted. Hey, look, we have this opportunity at this, B2B company, VC backed. Here's a profile, and you're like, yes, I want to interview there. So first interview to last, that could be 2 to 4 weeks. Some companies,
Sure.
it depends.
A month. Let's say it's a month.
Could be a month. Yeah. The moment
Offer comes through, acceptance.
Yeah, offer comes through, acceptance. At that moment, then that offer letter is the first piece of your application for Global Talent Stream. So in the application could be done in 1 or 2 weeks. It gets submitted. From when it's submitted, it's 30 days. Not a guarantee, but should be a 30 to 40 day window until it's accepted. When it's accepted and work permits issued, basically you get an email saying work permits waiting for you at a land border crossing. Come on in. You could literally then they're gonna say, but stop, get a negative COVID test right within 72 hours before you come in.
I see.
And so you could do that. You can have that set up in a few days, and then the company's waiting for you. You have your quarantine plan, of course, is already in place with your work visa application. You could come in that fast. So yeah, I would say from start to finish, less than 3 months.
Okay.
Now it's doable.
Yeah, and it sounds like the quarantine the 14 days or whatever they're requiring may require some plus or minus. Hopefully that'll all change, in the next 6 months or so. But yeah, that's what I was thinking. 90 days to me sounds kind of like if I'm a candidate and I get an offer from a tech company in Canada, and I accept that offer to go in through Global Talent Stream, it looks like about a 90-day process based on everything right now.
Yeah, I would even say you could probably be done in 60. Yeah, but because 60 days, it's a couple of weeks to put your application together, 4 to 6 weeks to get approved, and then day. And then basically also Canadian Immigration says on your quarantine period, they expect you to work. So they reach out to the employer and say they need you to facilitate that work. They know that person's or an Airbnb, that's fine. They're expecting you're working. You're just isolating due to COVID.
So another question that Rakshitha asked is, how long does it take for work visa to work for Canadian companies? I think we kind of covered that, roughly 90 days. Does the process speed up if the Express Entry profile is already in the pool? So Express Entry is the merit-based system though, correct? Or is that something completely?
I think that, yeah, I'm not a Canadian immigration lawyer, so I want to be careful with that response.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am used to the work visa for Global Talent Stream being completely independent, that a Canadian immigration officer looks at it, reviews it on its merit, and is saying for a work visa, for a 2-year work visa, approved, and then that's issued.
Two totally different silos, right? You're talking about an Express Entry merit-based point silo that you're already in the pool of, whereas Global Talent Stream is based on a work visa that's been secured through an employer. But the point that Mark was making earlier, Rakshitha, I think, is if you're looking to get to Canada, Global Talent Stream is an option for you, especially if you have some things pending here. Because if you identify an employer, get into Canada, there's 50 points automatically, and you're in Canada. So that basically shoots you up the points, ratio very quickly. And so that's where I think this becomes an ideal solution and an ideal plan B, is that right now maybe Express Entry or getting your Canadian PR is in some sort of delay, and you're like, I'm ready to go now. And so that's where the Global Talent Stream aspect comes into it. But thank you for all the questions. I think those were very, very good, and the ones that Prakul asked earlier were excellent as well. Well, Mark, we don't have any others in the Q&A. I don't want to continue to talk repetitively, but I wanted to give you an opportunity here before I do the closeout. Is if folks on my webpage I'll put a blog post out there that will introduce the new partnership here with Path to Canada. There'll be a banner. You can just click the banner. It'll take you right to their website. And the link to that will always be in the video descriptions. And if of course, if you have any questions, you can message me or reach out to me directly. As I said, Mark's his face is all over the website, so you can't miss it there if you have questions there. This is definitely something we want to make sure there is transparency in terms of the process, because it can be very complicated. So with that being said, Mark, I just wanted to throw it over to you. And oh, Rakshitha did say she was picked in Express Entry, but COVID has delayed it. So, and then says GTS is a great program. So there you have some verification from someone who has looks like some firsthand knowledge of it, which is always good to get that reaffirmation. So, Mark, anything you wanted to close out with here today?
I'm appreciative you had me on, and yeah, I'm definitely trying to help as I can. And I think, as you know, in summary, it's if you think your company may be willing to move your job north, I can help you through syndesis. If you're on your own journey and either you're facing a deadline, like you didn't get picked this year, or just looking ahead saying, I don't know if this is going to work. In the US, Path to Canada is a great way to find out what's possible and to connect up with Canadian tech companies that are eager to hire.
Yeah, and I agree with that 100%. And I just want to thank you for coming on, and thank you for being a sponsor of the H1B Guy platform. Really looking forward to what's ahead for us over the next several months. So I wanted to remind everyone that today's live stream was brought to you by Path to Canada. Path to Canada provides a plan B for high-skilled immigrants currently in the U.S. whose status may be uncertain. If you're facing an H-1B denial, an OPT expiration, don't get caught off guard. Make sure you have a plan B, and Path to Canada is that answer. They'll help you navigate the process, and if you're interested in finding out more, as I said, there's a link in the description of the video. And today's stream was also brought to you by RecruiterNetworks.com, the smart solution for digital perm ads since 2001. This national job board network provides recruitment websites in 1,024 major U.S. metro areas. Each local job board is its own portal and is a low-cost resource for immigration recruitment ads for all industries and professions, with a flat price of $225 per ad, regardless of which city you choose. RecruiterNetworks.com has been the #1 place for immigration attorneys, immigration ad agencies, and employers to meet the DOL requirements for the digital portion of the perm advertisement rules. RecruiterNetworks.com. Tell them the H1B guy sent you. And again, the links for Path to Canada are in the video description. They'll be on my website on a post later today, and also on the About page on my website. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate. Message me directly, and I can get you in contact with Mark if we need to take it further. Just wanted to ask you again to like this video, subscribe to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube, and click the bell for notifications so that you're notified anytime we go live, like we did here this morning at 11 a.m. on April Fool's Day with Mark. And I'll tell you, it created a lot of chatter. People wanted to know what was I going to be gagging them with today. But no, this is very serious business. Just a huge announcement here for the H1B Guy and the platform today. So, but if you've made it this far and you're still on the stream, thank you from Path to Canada. Thank you from Mark. Thank you from me. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch today. And if you're watching this at a later time, thank you for watching this video. We really appreciate your support. With that being said, I'm Robert. I'm the H1B Guy, your global source